the whole concept of prepping, why we distilled it down to self-reliance and independence.
Yeah.
Because you can take any aspect of your life and say, what am I dependent on to make this happen? What am I reliant on in order to get, like, security? If a bad guy shows up at my house, who am I really dependent on? Can I handle that problem? Probably not. I got to call the cops. The self-reliance and independence aspect says, okay, well, what if you have to deal with it? What's that look like? How do you do that? How do you do it in a world where you have to abide by the law, so you can't just come out like Rambo? And how do you deal with it when you don't have to abide by the law? Because they're two different scenarios. See, in the States, someone can break into your house, rummage through your house. If you shoot them, you can go to jail. You got to know your laws. That's all goes back to that sort of, personal responsibility ethic that is big in the prepping community. It's like, this is my problem. It's not the cop's problem. It's not the representative's problem. It's not Joe Biden's problem. He's got enough damn problems. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Joining me today is James Walton of the Prepper Broadcasting Network. James transformed his life when he moved from being reliant upon the state for all his needs to a self-reliant, autonomous, and influential member of the prepper movement in the United States. In this episode, we'll learn how prepping is much more than just a way to store food. It's a way of life. We'll learn about the 6 steps to preparedness and how to live with a sovereign mindset. This is Eyes Wide Open with me, your host, Lawrence Easman. Big Tech wants to censor the truth and restrict our freedoms. They can take away my channel, they can take away my platform, but they can't take away my mailing list. So if you want to stay connected, get my weekly newsletter by following the link in the description. And now it's time for our guest, James Walton. Welcome to Eyes Wide Open.
Thanks for having me, sir. I do appreciate you making this happen.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to have you on. I think it's really topical that we speak to somebody who can help us navigate through this doom-laden scenario that we see in front of us, and let's hope we can make it a little bit more positive than they're trying to paint it. So I like to just get straight into things these days. You're a expert in prepping, or it used to be called survivalism, and it's just an old and ancient practice that we all used to do long before this comfortable Western civilization, that you could call it, that we live in now. So tell us a little bit about how you became one of the main guys in the Prepper Broadcasting Network.
Oh man, it's hilarious. I mean, essentially I was so ill prepared for life in general that looking back on it now, it's pretty laughable. I had a couple things, goals in life. I had a wife, I had a guitar, and I was a chef, and I was content. But outside of those skills, man, I was pretty much useless. I could fish because I've been doing that since a kid. It was in 2011. We got hit by a hurricane called Hurricane Irene here in the States, in Virginia. My wife had just had her first child, our first child, right? He's a month old. All the power goes out. Tree comes down in the neighborhood. We're trapped in the neighborhood. And it was just such a failure from my perspective as a man, husband, father. I was so ill prepared for that situation. Brand new baby, wife feels like crap. She just had a baby a month ago. You know how ladies feel. And just everything, nobody was harmed. There was no real catastrophe outside of the catastrophe in here, right? The ego was just damaged. And I was like, you got to do better, man. This, you have to be way better than this, because you're 1 month into being a dad and you have no answers for any of this stuff. Started this podcasting thing from that moment, largely because I began listening to these prepper podcasts, and one network in particular was just looking for hosts. Like, between their shows, they had an ad that said, you want to be a host on the Prepper Podcast Radio Network? I said, yeah, why not? I mean, and I just kind of framed the show as like the new prep, the neophyte prepper, right? The guy who doesn't know anything. We're going to learn together, because I can't teach you anything. So don't come here for that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I never thought it would come to this, but it has come to this. Now we're a 20 host podcast network. We're about to have a couple of hosts in Europe that are going to take off here in a little while. And it's just crazy. It's crazy how it went from, I knew nothing 10, 11 years ago. I was worthless. And it's a very different world now, for sure.
So I think what's interesting about prepping is that I've been looking at prepping for 15 years. Just going on the internet, and that's one of the things that you search into, isn't it? Especially if you're into conspiracies, as I am, right? My dad is even more into it than me, and he loves the gadgets and he loves all that. And so I've always had one eye on the whole prepping thing, and it's always been something really interesting to me, but it always felt as if it was just an insurance policy. It was just an opportunity for you to be involved in nature and, learning man skills that were taken away from us because we've been so domesticated and infantilized. So I thought it was just on those levels, it was good and it was useful. But that was until COVID hit. And all of a sudden, the most popular people that you knew were the preppers, weren't they? Because they'd been planning for this for 20 years, and all of a sudden, everyone wanted to know their opinion on what to do when the shit hit the fan. The famous saying in prepping, isn't it, when the shit hits the fan? And now, I guess, COVID had so many benefits as well as terrible things that happened. But one of the many benefits is people taking more care and attention about their future and protecting their family and not being so dependent on the state to do everything for you. And I think we're faced with another doomsday scenario at the moment, which is the whole idea of this cost of living crisis that the government, here especially, they're threatening to turn the power off during winter. There's going to be blackouts. And this is all completely manufactured, of course, and all designed to traumatize the population. But I think if you have these skills and this level of preparedness, is that, you're more steeled, aren't you, to take it on?
Yeah, we call it self-reliance and independence. That's our tagline, self-reliance and independence. And it kind of stands, anathema to the, convenience and dependence that we are right now, right? Like the society is a convenience-driven, totally dependent society, whether it be on the light switch, hit the light switch, lights come on, hit the, tap water comes out, it's safe to drink. And, people are seeing that maybe there was a time frame when that was true and it might be coming to an end, especially when the government starts deciding, hey, we're just going to shut power off. We're going to shut heat off. We're going to allow you to cool your house to a certain level. In Colorado here, the smart thermostats, they just stopped working after a certain temperature. And the state government, I think it was, they were doing just that. They were saving the planet, at the cost of everybody in Colorado who was hot. So that whole mentality of sort of self-reliant and independent living, it opens up a lot of doors, but it all really comes back to that. It comes back to less people having control over how you live, and you having more control over how you provide for your family and protect your family and all those things. And it's the way, man. It really is the way. The further you look into it, you start seeing that almost all the problems that humanity faces right now can be solved through a lifestyle like this. You know what I mean? A focus on self-reliance and independence, because it's one of the quickest ways to empower the individual. It really is. If you talk about empowering the individual, giving them skills, teaching them how to grow their own food, catch their own water, provide their own power, those types of things, people get better, people get stronger. And, the lifestyle that we live now largely makes us weaker, and I think the people in power really like that.
America is kind of built on this idea of frontierism as well, isn't it? About exploring the great unknown and taming it, and at least being a master of your own destiny rather than these infantilized, domesticated farmyard animals, which is what they're trying to turn us into. And you've got the whole tradition of the Montana Freemen. I love those guys, and I did the whole Freeman on the land stuff. Eventually made its way to UK and in the 2009, where we were challenging the actual authority of the state. Where does your authority come? Why do you think you can just boss us around? So that was all great information for me. And I think the prepper stuff was kind of tied into a lot of that. And I know the prepper stuff isn't just, kind of make it up as you go along. There's a very discernible structure in how to organize yourself as a self-reliant, autonomous, sovereign individual. And I think that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. Is there 6 points or something? What was it called? Can you remind me?
Yeah, we call it the base level of preparedness. And I just came up with that as a way to introduce people to prepping in a way that wouldn't be so damn intimidating and overwhelming, because it's a big niche, there's a lot. And you get to the point where it's like, where do I even begin? What do I start with? You know what I mean? Because there's just so much. Do I solve my problems? Do I solve the problems that are on the TV? Do I solve the problems that the guy on the radio are telling me about? Because there's a lot, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, the first real prep that I purchased was a 5-gallon pail of hard red wheat. Have you ever heard of this stuff?
No. Oh.
I told you I was a chef. I can
Yeah.
cook anything, anything. I went to college for it, spent years in the restaurant industry. I can cook anything. And reading these blogs, getting terrified by what could possibly happen to the US dollar and so on and so forth, these blogs kept telling me, dude, you're going to need this wheat. You're not going to have enough. The dollar's going to be worthless. You're not going to be able to afford bread. Went over all of my training and everything, all my common sense, just out of fear. I buy this 5-gallon pail of hard red wheat. It comes to the door and I realize I have no idea what to do with this ingredient. It's probably the only ingredient on earth that I have no idea how to prepare. I've never cooked it before. I know nothing of it. It's the cardinal rule of food storage. Number one rule of food storage as a prepper is you store what you eat, you know? The moment you start buying stuff just because it's cheap, but your family doesn't like it, you're wasting money. So
Yeah.
that was my big max miss up right off the bat. So if you don't know where you're going, then yeah, you know, it's hard. So that's why we created those 6 items.
Do you think it's like scenario specific, right? So I remember during COVID is that I bought a chest freezer and I literally just filled it up with meat, right? And I just had that.
Yeah.
We eventually got through it like over the course of a year, but you know that for me was kind of scenario specific because the supermarkets were going crazy, people were going crazy, and there was this whole fear storm that there wasn't going to be enough food. And now we're kind of faced with something similar with this whole cost of living crisis, which isn't imagined. The prices in the supermarkets, they're going up on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
It's going to get to the point where whatever the shit that they're trying to sell us, we ain't going to be buying it. And what are they going to do then? They're going to be left with tons of stock on the shelves that no one wants to buy at the prices they're trying to sell them at. And then that goes right up the chain, isn't it, of the production chain. So right now we're faced with a specific issue, which is we can't afford the shit they're trying to sell us. And some of the essentials are starting to become a tight squeeze for most people. For people who are wealthy, it doesn't really matter to them. But I don't know whether it's just another fear storm that they're trying to create because they like to do that to the population to scare us and then control us. And then, they push, they pull, they push, they pull. What's your take on the whole situation right now that we face as a general population with what's coming towards us in this so-called dark winter,
Unfortunately, I mean, the God's honest truth right now is if you haven't planned, particularly for the fuel issue and the heating issue, quite frankly, I imagine in most places you're going to have to suffer whatever happens to you. You know what I mean? Because it's a tough thing to turn around on right now, especially from a worldwide perspective, right? I mean, you can't season wood in a month. So that's a tough one. If you don't have the infrastructure to burn wood, then, it's not like you can just throw a chimney into my apartment, So there are parts of this thing that people are too deep into already. They're going to have to really do some hard learning. And I hope what they do is they sit down and journal or write out what's the worst part of this whole situation that they're going through, because we're pretty deep into a major problem, but there's still plenty that can be done from the standpoint of those 6 basics. You know what I mean? And really, we talk about water as number 1. We talk about food at number 2. Talk about things like off-grid power as number 3. And if you had only 3 buckets to fill, those things are going to help you through the worst of worst scenarios, no matter what they are. Some kind of way to generate power, some food on the shelf, and some way to collect water or filter water. Even if we're not talking scenario specific, you could get your money's worth out of that right off the bat. And that's all variable, how you collect water, if you can collect water. Each one of those things are there's a lot of variables involved. But this situation, the importance of this situation, I think that we're in right now is, and what I've been talking about for years, is that this is the by any means necessary mentality. And people have to recognize that their government does not care about the well-being of you. In fact, there's probably no one on this earth that cares about the well-being of you, legitimately. So the fundamental change in here is I have to be prepared to self-rescue, or I have to be prepared to be the person that cares about me, my kids, my spouse, whatever the situation is. Because it's a fairy tale to imagine that there's some representative, there's some person that exists that's going to care about you more than you. And we have long lived in this world where we believe that. Supermarket guy cares about me. Supermarket's always full. You know, the police care. They'll come when I call, won't they? So we're moving very quickly into a world where people are going to have to come to realize, or they will realize, just out of the hardship of it all, that their game is they're the sole player and the sole proprietor in their life, and they have to take full responsibility for their being, or suffer crazy consequences, you know? And we'll see those crazy consequences probably in your country and in my country this winter.
I think it has a positive element to it because, you
Definitely.
know, the breakdown of the family has been one of the cornerstones of the destruction of the West, right? And it's men have become soft. They've forgotten what their role is, or they don't know how to play it because there's no hardship, there's no friction, there's no test, there's no rites of passage. You just bumble through life, don't you? And hopefully you think, oh man, no, I don't have to be tested. I don't have to be tested. And I think these things that are being threatened and proposed, and you know, it's kind of like, you know, you have to find out what you're made of here. Really, it can only be a good thing for a man to realize what he is and who he is and what his role is in this crazy adventure we call life. I think it's positive.
There's some positive aspects to it. There will be some positive aspects to it, but there will be people who die too. You know, there's going to be people who don't know any better, take a propane heater, stick it in their apartment to stay warm, go to sleep and never wake up. You know what I mean? And that's going to happen. I mean, that's going to happen here in America. That's going to happen in your country with some kind of heating device. I'm sure that I know it's just, it happens every year when fuel doesn't cost exponentially more money. You know what I mean? So it's going to happen even more.
Okay, then we've got a responsibility here in this podcast to make sure nobody takes a propane gas into their bedroom with them, right? So let's do our best to educate the people with the best the best methods.
Coal in the house, you can't put a generator in your home. If you do, I usually promote the kerosene heaters. I think they're very effective. But if you do that, then you have to crack a window. You have to let I mean, you should crack a window even if you're burning a fireplace all the time, just to protect the quality of the air. And you mentioned men are what we used to be. So that knowledge is history. People have no idea. They'll take a generator and just open the back door and, you know, power that thing up and heat the house for as long as they can until they get lightheaded or kill everybody in the home.
Well, let's deal with because I know the 6 things. You've touched upon the first 3, but let's go through the 6 first, and then we'll focus on each one and go into a little bit of depth on each one.
Roger that. So we got water, food, backup power, first aid, security, and the one that most people don't do, evacuation. Probably one of the most important, right? The ability to get out of there.
Is that like your bug out plan? Is it the evacuation?
I wouldn't say bug out plan. I'd say that literally just get out the door, have a place you're choosing to go to, but it doesn't have to be an end of the world sort of scenario. You know, one great example of evacuation is the hurricanes, right? The hurricanes in the U.S. Sometimes you got to evacuate. And every time there's an evacuation that is broadcast, hundreds of people, thousands are rescued that didn't evacuate, you know, and could have just avoided so much damage to themselves, you know, their families, loss of limb and life just by evacuating. And so the emphasis on evacuation is a big one for me.
Okay, so let's focus on the first one, which is water. Now, when you're making a prepping plan or a prepping strategy, do you plan for the worst case scenario and then work back from there? Because it can get quite big and the scope can increase quite wildly, can't it, if you start thinking for worst case? So when it comes to water, what's the initial focus and strategy and tactics that you would deploy?
Sure. Yeah. You can't afford to work backwards unless you're rich. If you're rich, then you can do whatever you want. But for the average person, you can't say, I want to have enough water for a year, so I'm going to buy a $10,000 water cistern, hook it up to my well or my spigots and bury it, you're talking about a massive project that most people don't have the money for. And then you can't do anything else because you spend all your money on that. So I think incremental preparedness is important. It's sort of week to week. Water's a great example because you can buy a gallon jug of water a week. You can buy a 6-pack of gallon jugs of water a week for $3, $5, whatever it is. And if you do that, you're going to start to accrue water inside the home, that's an important thing to have. You definitely want to have access to water inside your home that you don't have to go outside to get, and also that you don't have to run through a filter. You don't have to purify. But there are limitations to how much water you can store in your home, right? Because it's your house,
Yeah.
heavy, big, space in and of itself. But the general metric for water is a gallon per person per day. You know what I mean? So that's how you can kind of set your goals early on. I want to be prepared for 2 weeks. All right, then you need a gallon of water per person in your home per day for 2 weeks. Do the math. That's what you need. And you'll find that if you're trying to put 2 weeks worth of water away inside the home, you're gonna have a lot of space taken up from water, right? So the idea of putting 6 months worth of water away in your garage, that's probably not going to work for most people.
What are the contingencies in that situation? And if you can't store the volume, then what would be, because again, it's like, well, how long do I need to survive for? Is it going to be 2 weeks? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Because if it starts going into those realms, then the world has come to an end anyway, hasn't it? You're talking about a major apocalypse situation, and you're probably going to be getting hunted out by, mindless zombies in the first place. So there's all that to consider, isn't there?
That's the importance of sort of the self-reliance mindset, is that every prepper starts with buying stuff to get off the ground in most cases, right? And that's what we're talking about with cases of water. We're going to go out, we're going to buy some cases of water each week and start to store water so that we have some level of preparedness in an event like that. Once you cross a certain threshold with all of these, you move into that realm of self-reliance, where now it's like buying is not the answer. Buying is merely, grains of sand off the hourglass. No matter what you buy and throw in your house, eventually it disappears, right? You have to come out here. You have to learn to catch rainwater. You have to learn where the water resources are locally. Maybe dig your own well. Maybe dig your own well and don't tell anybody, because not everybody wants you to have a well. But that's your call. So you've got to figure these things out. And like I said, you could do a lot of damage with money, buying stuff, putting stuff away, and being prepared in that way. But if you're hyper focused and you understand what's happening to the world, the goal should be to establish a little bit of preparedness in the home, and then, start to expand to a real sort of self-reliance mindset where you're doing some things off the grid. You're doing some, you're producing food. My food producers are over this way right now. I have chickens here in the backyard, and, those are the types of things you start doing: goats, chickens, quail, all these sort of food producing animals that you can have even in suburbs, that start to push you past that idea of just buying your way into safety, because it won't work long term.
So, water, store what little you can, or store whatever volume you can in terms of what you can physically hold. And then beyond that, rain barrels.
That's a good next step. They hold about 55 gallons of water. So, you go from storing a couple gallons a week to putting 2 of these barrels on your downspouts out back so nobody knows you have them. You got 110 gallons of water now. Divide that up, 1 gallon per person per day per family of 4. You've taken care of a serious time frame there. You know what I mean? Just in what's in those rain barrels. And those things, they can get a lot of use. If the water goes out in your home and you have to flush the toilet, that's usually what we use our rain barrel water for. You can flush toilets then without having to worry about wasting good water inside your home.
So do you plan a scenario in which the actual water plants are closed down as well, so there is no running water coming through the taps? Is that something that is part of a preparedness strategy?
That's the point of the rain barrel and the stored water. You know what I mean? You want to have the stored water, gets you through sort of the initial, oh my God, what happened?
Yeah.
Let's sit down, let's listen to this emergency radio, and let's open a bottle of water and drink it instead of breaking out the water filter and, bringing
Yeah.
hauling water in from outside. You know what I mean? It's that last little bite of convenience. But then you want to be,
Yeah.
you want to have a creek on property, whatever you can do to set yourself up to have access to water.
I live near the sea. I live like 3 minutes away from the sea. And there's tons of water there, right? But it's all salty. So is there a way to desalinate the water that isn't ridiculously expensive?
I mean, your best method's going to be distillation.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about I interviewed a guy years ago, and I'll get you this product after, since it's of interest to you and your survival.
Okay.
But he basically created a solar still, which would work for seawater, but it's way more efficient than you doing it. You know what I mean? Digging a hole and putting salt water in it. That does that. Leaves the salt behind, distills the fresh water into another container, then you have water.
Wow.
But yeah, you're going to have to distill that water in some way. You can get brackish and safe enough water to drink by digging away from the ocean far enough, or away from the salty body of water far enough, digging straight down in the ground, letting the water sort of seep up through. Yeah, I'd want, if I were in your position, I'd want something that could produce some water. And I'd definitely be catching rainwater.
Well, we get plenty of rain in England. That's the thing. That's the one benefit of the rain here, Okay, cool. Let's move on to food. You'd last, what is it, three days without water, a month without food?
Yeah, you got 3 days. That's the hard and fast. The starvation rule's different. Different people can go different lengths. And I imagine our soft culture, you might live, but you're not going to want to even move, and you're going to feel like hell if you don't eat. But for certain, 3 days without water, your internal organs start to shut down, and you don't know, how long you got after that. Water's a big one. It's just not a big one because we are so used to having it everywhere, clean, potable, waste it, spray it all over stuff. You know what I mean? So in here, it's like, we'll never run out of water until you run out of water. Food's a whole nother story, man. Food is, obviously food starts the way water starts, though, for most preppers. Honey, we need to buy more food, put it in the pantry.
In COVID, it was like, people who were stocking up, which was causing the panic in the supermarkets because everyone was going in and clearing the shelves, So I know quite a few people whose larders were packed full of baked beans and other types of tinned foods because people were trying to get ahead of the game. And I know that's a famous meme for preppers, isn't it? Where you see the mason jars and they have these super organized pantries with the most amazing foods that they've been prepping for years and years and years. And they have these fantastic spaces. And it all came, very real to people during COVID. And they went out and started to stock up. And my dad himself, he's got quite a packed larder at the moment. So I think that's the first thing people would do, isn't it? Is buy dry goods. Things that last, things that store.
The key there, and what most people miss, is you have to treat, we call it the prepper's pantry. It's because it's easy. You have to treat the prepper's pantry like an inventory. It's not just buy stuff, put it in the basement, and wait, right? You got to buy the stuff that you eat, and you got to rotate. We eat spaghetti sauce. Everything I use to make spaghetti sauce comes out once a week. We make a pot of spaghetti sauce. We buy new stuff. The best investment you can make, and I have them in my pantry, are those they're can racks that rotate the cans themselves. You load them from the top and pull them from the bottom. That makes that lifestyle just totally different, But again, it's that same mentality of the hourglass. Anything you buy and put in that house is just a countdown if we reach a situation where there's really a problem and no food anywhere. So you've got to, secure a certain amount of food that makes you comfortable. But remember, you're going to cross a threshold eventually where food's going to come from out here, and that's a whole nother bunch of skills that are highly worth learning and really valuable. Hunting, fishing, trapping, foraging, those kinds of things, husbandry.
We don't have any tradition of that anymore here unless you are one of the, the upper class. They're the only ones that really go hunting here.
No land, right? That's the tough part.
Well, it's all controlled very, very tightly. This idea of storing food for the long term is ancient. It's a part of the human story. It's only in the last 50 years, even less, that we no longer store food for the winter or beyond because the supermarkets became our larder, didn't they? They became, why store it in your fridge when you can store it in the supermarket's fridge? Because all you've got to do is walk down there and take it off the shelves. but that
Yeah.
makes us reliant upon the supermarket for our basic needs. And it seems alien to people to think, what, I've got to stock up my cupboard for months, you know, but that was what my grandparents did, and their grandparents and their grandparents,
Sure.
dating back right to the beginning.
We've been focusing at the Prepper Broadcasting Network on our membership side on charcuterie and curing meats, curing
Yeah.
fish. In this, there's a shed behind you. In my world, there's a shed, and there's a big piece of pork hanging in that shed right now that we salted for 30 days, rinsed, hung, wrapped in cheesecloth, and that thing will hang there for 6 months, and then it'll essentially be like a cured ham or like a prosciutto, something like that. Or some really easy things that the average person can do and not even need a refrigerator to store food. There's a lot of ways to not even need refrigeration to store meat that people just
Yeah.
don't do it. And salt curing is probably the best. Air drying and salt curing, because you can put I'm getting intimidated by chickens right now. They're all I'm sitting on a hay bale and they have all just realized that I'm on it. That's some of the stuff we're working on right now to sort of get back to that mindset of, it doesn't have to come from the supermarket, and it certainly doesn't have to go into the fridge, you know, because that's a mentality that you'll have to live by, especially if you get good at things like hunting in a collapsed world, right? So now, okay, maybe I'm good fisherman, maybe I'm good at hunting. I bring
What do I do with it?
home. Yeah, exactly. We're off grid now because they attacked the power plant, so the climate change lunatics don't let us turn the power on anymore. We're not allowed to have refrigeration. We just eat our bugs and be happy. So, you know, you got to know how to, and we're just, like you said, we're just relearning. You know, it's just a relearning process. It's like a flicking on of switches in the brain. Like, oh yeah, you know, some things we talk about on the Prepper Broadcasting Network, and people have those lights turn on and they go, oh, my grandmom used to do that all the time. You know, and it's that, like you were saying, that's how new our frailty is. You know, we're not frail creatures. This little time, I call it the 100-year amnesia.
It's like we're at a crossroads in our history. Is that, you know, you've got one group of humans that may be heading off down the Great Reset route, and they may never return, or they're going into even more domestication to the point where they're just well-fed battery hens. And then you've got another group of humans who are saying, no, we want to go back to our original design. We want to go and be the way we're made to be, and enjoy and experience life in all of its challenges and stresses and the things that make us alive.
They want to be human.
Yeah, we want to be human.
We overshot optimal human.
Yeah.
That's what
it's not too much to ask, is it?
Optimal was here. We overshot it. We got too good at being human, and now we're just getting fat. You know what I mean?
Well, at least that fat will come in useful when the shit hits the fan. You know, at least I'm carrying some of my dinner around with me. You know, that's what fat's designed for. It's the survival mechanism.
Yeah. At least you won't. It'll take you longer to starve, right? I guess.
I got quite into fasting at one point, right? And into the science of fasting. There's a few Russian guys who go, Sav Marga, I think the guy's name is, and he is the master at dry fasting. He'll do no food, no water, and he can go for 40 days. No food, no water. Right?
No water, 40 days.
No food,
He's
no
lying
water.
to you.
No, check him out. Check him out. The body
What's
adapts.
his name? I will check him out.
Sav Marga. I'll send you the link. But basically, what he says is that the body it gets water from the atmosphere, right? So that the pores open and the lungs turn into condensers. Yeah. Anyway, we can have a conversation about that another time, but it's really interesting, especially if you're a prepper and you run out of shit. If you know that you can survive.
Tell everybody to go watch him.
So for food then, just for someone beginning into this whole prepping experience who might be a little bit scared about what's being threatened down the line this winter, what would you suggest is the basic moves that they can do to protect themselves?
The mindset in the early stages is the same with water, the same as it is with water, right? So you're going to start to bolster what you have at home already. That's step number one. You know what I mean? So if you have a week, 2 weeks worth of groceries in your house, you know, after a week, I have to go to the supermarket because there's nothing to eat. That's your first problem to solve. And you do it just like we talked about with water. Buy an extra can or two every time you go to the supermarket. just so that you can start to build. And over 3 months' time, you'll start to build a cache or a larder, like you guys call it. I like that word better. Of extra food, so that in this sort of situation, you can have the ability to feed yourself and your family. The other thing to look into is to change where you shop. I think now is probably a time, not just where maybe a few years ago you had the opportunity to say, sure, I'll just spend more money. But I think people are reaching a point now where heat and food are starting to play that dangerous game of which one do I not do? Do I put oil in the tank, or do I do I put more food in the cabinet? So you may want to look at like alternate supermarkets, dented can type supermarket. I don't know if they're a thing in the UK, but we have these supermarkets where they take sort of second rate canned goods and produce and stuff like that and sell them.
Yeah.
But I would most certainly try to do something like that, and build that base of groceries.
So if we move on to the third one, which is quite important and is the one that's being talked about most at the moment, which is power. Right? And I was watching a guy called Gonzalo Lira. He's like a correspondent he's American. Well, he's Chilean, but he's an American citizen. But he's in Ukraine, and he does reports from Ukraine, right? And he did a report yesterday telling us what it's like to lose power in a war zone, right? Because in the city he's in, Kharkiv, I think it is, one of the cities in Ukraine, they cut the power, all of the electricity. And he's giving you a subjective experience of what it's like in the winter to lose power, right? And it was really compelling. It was a really compelling testimony, right? And he's saying, when I was a kid in Chile, we had a few blackouts and we enjoyed it because I was a kid. He said, but now a man in his 50s, right, and it's freezing cold, no TV, no internet, no entertainment, no heat, no gas to cook food. He said everything became very, very heightened. The problem became really heightened. And he said we don't realize how much we rely upon electricity and power. We just take it for granted because it's always been there, hasn't it? From the moment we're born, it's always been at the end of a switch. Now, I think that one is quite a difficult puzzle to solve. What's your take on that? Because I know we have things like wood-burning stoves, we have generators, but I always think with generators, you need fuel. If the fuel's gone, what are you going to do with the generator? So what's the whole strategy for power?
Yeah, it's a very short-term solution to have a generator. I would caution people against sort of this, especially in the prepping world, I see a big push on solar generators. A lot of companies selling these solar generators, I think they're promising a little bit too much. Even some of the most powerful solar generators out there, they can't run a lot for a long time. And they take a pretty long time to power up. So we do an event every year called Prepper Camp here in the States. It's one of our favorite things. It's a 3-day camp out, and
cool.
We all the hosts speak and, do a bunch of stuff, teach classes, that kind of thing. But we've played around with the Jackeries. We've played around with different solar generators in those events. And, they're not going to help you as much, particularly with heating and cooling needs. They're really not going to help you. They can put lights on, they can put entertainment on, and they're good for that. But if you're an overcast, any kind of overcast, you're not powering that thing. They don't work even with a little cloud. So, and then of course at night when you want them to work the most, you obviously can't power them. And the gas generator, of course, is limited by how much gas you have access to, how much gas you have stored at your home. And they're massive investments. See, the trouble right now is people are pressed already. So this idea of like outfitting the home with solar, there are people who can't, they're in that gray area of, do I heat the home or do I starve? And it's a really tough place to be. So you got to go back. You got to go back to fire, I think, unfortunately. I think it was a month ago, I was on TNT radio on a show called Germ Warfare, and he was reading a story, Jeremy was the host, about buying cow patties to heat in Germany.
Yeah.
And I was, and I just couldn't believe how quickly all that infrastructure had fallen through in a nation like Germany. And unfortunately, I think that's probably the best solution is to figure out, if your home's not outfitted to heat, obviously layering clothes, your ability to boil water so that you can drink hot fluids, having the right kind of clothes like wool can make a huge difference. Coordinating off a room or isolating one single room to sort of everybody
Yeah.
sits there in there, everybody sleeps in there. I mean, these are terrible things to think about in the modern age, but they will keep you warm, and they're ways that people have kept warm for a long time. You might find yourself outside around a fire is better to stay warm than inside. You know what I mean? Particularly during the daylight hours. So we all have to kind of take a step back in terms of off-grid heat in particular through this winter. And probably the best bet is going to be getting around some kind of a fire, some kind of coal, that kind of thing, particularly if you don't live in a place that's outfitted for, say, a wood stove. But he has a flue they can just or has the ability to drill a hole through the roof and run pipe so that they can have a stove like that. Space heaters are decent, but I've weathered power outages in the winter with space heaters and a fireplace. Neither are exceptional. There's no real easy answer for it. Even if you had a home outfitted with solar panels, I think you'd still struggle to run any kind of serious heat pump or radiator system that would really heat your home. Just the reality of it, it's tough. It takes a lot of power to heat a house, a big house, or even a modern size, mid-sized modern house, even with the insulation. So,
especially because it's come so cheap to us, hasn't it, for so long, is that, do you really care if your doors are left open because the heat's on? I mean, that it's that whole inefficiency. It's that everything has come so easy and so cheap over these last 50, 70, 80 years that, it's a rude awakening if these systems and this infrastructure comes to a grinding halt, and what the fuck are we gonna do? And that's, I think, I like the whole problem solving nature of it, to be honest. I really do. It's like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? I think there's something really interesting and challenging about trying to figure this out, because we're going back to basics, aren't we? About back to what we are in the UK during COVID. I keep using that as a reference point, but I think it's an important moment in modern history in terms of coming to terms with these issues, rather than just having them as crazy preppers who are prepping for things that aren't going to happen. It came to pass, didn't it? So in the UK, we see the huge boom in caravan sales and motorhomes, and people wanting to go to like a substitute prepping camp. It's like they want to get out of the cities. They want to get in places where they feel safer. And in these camper vans now, a lot of them, they're fitted with wood burning stoves, and there's a lot of off-grid camper vans that are being built all the time. So it's really entering the culture here now. 100% people are more serious about preparing for it. I mean, maybe that's the answer, is to get out of the cities. I don't know. Are you in a city, or are you rural?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm not a head for the hills prepper. I like society. I'm in a southern city, pretty small population, but it's still a city. I'm not abandoning civilization. It's too good. We've done too much.
I know.
Hard to say we're out. You know what I mean? I like art. I like going to museums, eating out at restaurants, all that kind of stuff. If power goes out and things happen in or around me, we're well prepared to weather because of what we've talked about. You know what I'm saying?
So you're a cool prepper then, yeah? You're a cool prepper,
Actually, in my ranks, I'm not a cool prepper. Okay. In my rank, I'm taking all kinds of unnecessary risks. I should be way out in the mountains of Virginia, far away from anyone, and having a much larger plot of land, more animals, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what the prepper dream is, I guess, in a lot of our world.
Well, I think that's interesting, because it brings us on to the next point, which is security. Because, again, there's no point having all these things set up, right? And all this work and effort that you put into building these insurance systems, basically, is that if the shit hits the fan, what does that actually mean on a safety level? If it really happens, what's being threatened, then there will be hordes marauding the street looking for the shit that they didn't prepare for. And they'll be prepared to just take it from you and steal it from you. Half of me thinks, well, what's the point in prepping if I've got to deal with a horde? Shouldn't I be figuring out how to deal with the horde rather than figuring out how to prep? Because if you put all this work in and a gang turn up and say, well, we're having that, what are you going to do? That's That's the big
Yeah, well,
question.
so security is a big question. I'll tell you right off the bat, though, and this is for goal setting for most people, but it's the reality. If you want to have security, then you got to have people. If you want to have security in your neighborhood, then you have to know your neighbors. If you're going to go through the trouble of setting up security in your neighborhood, then you should not be the place where the bad guys come. In other words, you're going to establish some kind of perimeter at some point in terms of security, right? If it's just you and your family, your perimeter will be your house or maybe your yard. And you're going to lose probably every battle that you have with that kind of perimeter because you don't have an army. You have
No.
you who can't die, your wife who can't die, and your kids who heaven help you can't die. So you don't have an army, and you're fighting from your property, which is a losing game. They have everything to gain, you have everything to lose right off the bat. So you have to have people, and you have to have a wider perimeter that extends far out from you and everybody else who's involved in this security perimeter. All that sounds really cool. If you don't have people to do it, then that's step one as far as security up against the hordes, since you brought that up. You know what I mean? And that comes down to neighbors and neighborhood. You should have a perimeter that extends well away from your home so that if there's fighting or violence that needs to be done, it happens well away from you and your family. You know what I mean? Or at least well away from your family. Obviously, you might be the one doing the violence, but it can't happen in your front yard. You know what I mean?
No.
Or you're going to lose every time. It's just,
But that's the last line of defense, isn't it?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
the biggest problem that people have is, and especially in America, is they think there's a gun or a sight or a body armor or a round of ammunition that they can buy and put in a safe in their house that will equal security. And it just won't, because you have to go to bed, you have to sleep. Largely, you're the only person who can take fire if you get in a gunfight, legitimate gunfight, because there's no worse horror story than, come on, little Janie, take the rifle, stick it out the window, and shoot the bad guy. You know what I mean? It's the worst case scenario.
It's all over then, isn't it? You know, that's what it's down to.
I've been blessed because I did the work early on, met the neighbors through a group of people in a community here that is well connected. And we've sat down and had conversations like during the election of 2020 about just this issue. What are some things that we should do if Donald Trump wins and this city goes crazy? Because that would happen probably. And they might find their way to the front of our neighborhood, and then we would have to do something about that, right? But what would that look like? Because you can't just haul off and start shooting people either, or you go to jail. So, you need people, you need planning, and you need to understand what you're really doing as opposed to living in a fantasy in terms of security. I'm just going to put the AR-15 out the window and start shooting people because that's not going to work for anybody.
Well, we don't even have the luxury of an AR-15 here, right?
We're not to be shooting bows and arrows out the window.
Bows and arrows, yeah. We're not even allowed to have a sharpened spoon here, right? So,
right, exactly.
Well, the thing is that in the UK, the police have the guns, the military have guns, the criminals have guns, but the citizens don't. Yeah, so we're the most vulnerable group. Yeah.
You guys have to have numbers. That's the answer for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Got to be a numbers thing. The overwhelming force can't come from your artillery. You know what I mean? It has to come from the sheer number of people and, the placement of those people. So, security from that standpoint is all about people. But the other aspect of security that's worth noting and worth talking about is the fortification of the home through, cameras, lights, locks, dogs, metal doors, wrought iron doors. There's a certain kind of tape made by 3M that you can put on your windows that makes them essentially shatterproof, so someone can't just put a boot through the window and come in. It kind of stays in the way and they have to deal with it. It gives you time to wake up, what the hell's going on type of thing. So the fortification of the home, just from the perspective of rising crime, not necessarily total collapse of society where guys just run around and take what they want. That is probably the most important aspect of security that someone can do right now. You can't right now bring your whole neighborhood together. You know what I mean? It's like the heating problem. It's like the water problem. Like there's a beginner's phase that you could do right now. And then there's another phase that you have to work on and you have to get there, and that's what community is. And I'll send you a link to the book I wrote in 2015. It's all about
Cool.
how to establish those relationships in a community, because there's a way to do it. There's a way to get people together that we
Mm.
probably all need to be doing, whether we're worried about preparedness or not. And it's worked. It's worked here, and it will work for your audience. You know what I
But
mean?
that's another benefit, isn't it? I mean, that's another benefit, which is not only do we learn how to be men again, not only do we learn how to, interact with nature as we're designed to do, but we also learn how to reform our communities, real communities, true communities, where we all look out for each other. I mean, that's another
Yeah.
thing that we've lost, which, it was integral to the way we lived our lives.
It's the word in your neighbor. If you want a word to drift on when you start down this path of sort of neighborhood building again or reforming, it's ownership. If you can get the people in your neighborhood to have ownership for the land beyond theirs, right? Like the house across the street, the neighborhood at large. You know what I mean? That sort of ownership mentality. I'm not going to leave that trash right there because I want my neighborhood to look nice. I like these people. I have a sense of ownership here. That's when you're winning, because to a certain degree, you're going to have one of two situations, right? Your neighbors are either going to say, to the right and left, you're going to say, we're out of here, this is crazy, or we're staying, what's the plan? And you want to have that conversation before they leave
Yeah.
or before they decide to stay, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, neighborhood is huge, man. It's people,
Yeah.
people in general is huge.
Mm.
Prepping, the whole concept of prepping gets way better when you have the collective minds of people around you.
Because prepping the word doesn't really cover actually what it is that you're doing, does it? Because prepping, you just think, okay, I'm preparing some food in case we run out. But it's more than that. It's like almost like terraforming a whole new civilization that is built upon the primary ideas of what our whole world is about. I mean, it's so much bigger than just this idea of collecting food, isn't it? It's civilizational almost in its scope, and that's, I guess, what the most difficult thing is, trying to introduce people to this whole concept is, starting small and then letting it grow in scale.
Well, that's why we distilled it down to self-reliance and independence,
Yeah.
because you can take any aspect of your life and say, what am I dependent on to make this happen, right? What am I reliant on in order to get, like, security? If a bad guy shows up in my house, who am I really dependent on? Can I handle that problem? Probably not. I got to call the cops. The self-reliance and independence aspect says, okay, well, what if you have to deal with it? What's that look like? How do you do that? How do you do it in a world where you have to abide by the law? So you can't just come out like Rambo, right? And how do you deal with it when you don't have to abide by the law? Because they're two different scenarios. You see, in the States, someone can break into your house, rummage through your house. If you shoot them, you can go to jail. You know what I mean? So you got to know your laws. You can't just say, I bought a really nice gun I wanted to shoot somebody with, and now you're in prison. You got to know what you're doing. So, but that's all goes back to that sort of, personal responsibility ethic that is big in the prepping community. It's
Yeah.
like, this is my problem. It's not the cop's problem. It's not the representative's problem. It's not Joe Biden's problem. He's got enough damn problems. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like a sovereign mindset. Is that you're developing a sovereign mindset?
That's exactly what it is.
I am the ultimate responsibility here, and it's on my shoulders, nobody else's.
And that's what men need more than anything right now, man. Men need that more than anything. They need to understand that this life is your responsibility. Oh, you have a wife? That's also your responsibility. She is not responsible for you. The kids, same deal. You know what I mean? And that's where men are getting hung up right now. They're in this mindset of like, who's my mom? Who's my dad now? That's their biggest problem. As soon as they start to have that as soon as they come into alignment with that idea of, it's just me. It's me. That's it. What am I capable of? Nothing. Huh?
It's a liberating experience. It's not scary. It's not even that tough, really. It's that you're free. You finally found out who you are, what you are, and what you're about.
It's beautiful. It brings on feelings of overwhelming joy. Even if you're just on the journey. You know what I mean? Even if you're not like somebody who has capability yet, if you're just on the journey, it's so nice. It's like, I'm getting there. I actually know where I'm going and I'm getting there, as opposed to just life is happening to me. and I'm
Mm,
going to work because I have bills. It's a whole nother mind frame that we've
mm.
lost for sure.
Okay, well, what about if during this whole idea of self-reliance and the sovereign mindset and becoming free, we have some medical problems, right? How do we prepare our first aid? What's that phase of the
Oh
plan
yeah.
look like?
I recommend the Prepper's Medical Handbook, which I think is the slimmest and most effective medical resource that you can put on the shelf, that was written by a guy who worked down in Haiti and knows a thing or two about off-grid medicine. Okay. It's an incredible book, and I think it's probably step one for anybody who's just getting into medical preparedness. Probably the worst thing you could do is go buy a first aid kit at Walmart, put it on the shelf, and say, "I'm ready." You know what I mean? Because first aid kits are pretty bad, no matter where you buy them.
Yeah.
Um,
You have to build your own, don't you? There's no other way around it. You have to build
it
your own
really
first
helps.
aid
Well,
kit.
it
Yeah.
helps to build your own, and it helps to have a resource to do it. And that's why that book's so important. In fact, at prepperbroadcasting.com, if you don't mind me plugging, we
No,
have
plug away.
we have a page. It's called Build Your Survival Medical Cache. And it's that book and everything that's used in that book that you can buy. You know what I mean? And the guy who wrote the book actually created that list for us and said, this is everything that's over the counter that's in my book and how to use it if you want to tell people about it. So I always push people there. I also like survival first aid kits. They're a really good company out of Australia. That was one of the first big first aid kits that I ever bought, and it solves problems still to this day. So those are two great resources off the bat. The next step sort of goes into training, greater training of CPR, things like that, how to learn how to do things. You know what I mean? With all this
Mm.
medical stuff, hands-on kind of training. And
So
then
becoming like almost like a paramedic, so that you can deal with emergency situations with at
it
least
depends on how deep you want to go. Yeah.
a few special moves. Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on how deep you want to go. I would, what I think is probably the most beneficial is to isolate things like a tourniquet or like a high fin chest seal, and isolate those and learn how to use them, and find
Mm.
training. A really popular one here in the United States is like a stop the bleed class, they're called. And these are just bullet hole wounds, deep cuts, lacerations. If you're bleeding and it's coming out of your body, how to stop it, and the many different tools that you can use to do that. You could keep somebody alive for a long time if you just stop them from bleeding, or they can die really fast if you don't know how to stop them from bleeding.
Yeah.
If an artery is
Mm.
severed, a major artery is severed, you could have minutes to
Mm.
stop that bleeding, or that person's going to die.
You know that scene in Black Hawk Down? Have you ever seen that film, Black Hawk Down?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the guy he gets his artery shot, doesn't he, in the leg, and they're trying to get in
yep,
there and stop the bleed, and they couldn't, and he
yeah.
passes on. It's always a powerful scene that really, I always
It's
remember
a
it.
weird thing. It's one of those weird things where if you know what you're doing, a severed artery. I know he used to be on the Prepper Broadcasting Network. He's a helicopter medic, and he told me a story that I'll never forget. Nothing bad happens in the story. It's just so terrifying to me. He said last week a little girl cut her artery in her arm. She said it didn't even hurt. Cut it on glass, a glass window. I knew exactly right off the bat what it was. So I applied enough pressure on her little arm, to stop it, because she's little, so he could do it literally with his fingers. And she, we just talked on our way to the ambulance. And once I got to the ambulance, they took over and, did whatever they had to do to stop the bleeding altogether. And he was just saying, it was just my thumb and fingers that were keeping that girl alive. And she didn't
Amazing.
understand the gravity of the situation. She wasn't scared. But, if nobody was around, she could have bled out in minutes. So
Wow.
I just think about that all the time with my kids. I'm like, oh, it's got to be this scary. And you don't want to be ill prepared for something like that, right?
Of course.
You don't want to be like, oh, you're fine. You just got a blood coming out of you. We'll patch it up with a Band-Aid. And then the life starts bleeding out of somebody you love because you have no idea how to stop it. Yeah, learning those fundamentals can have a huge effect. And then also an understanding of like, what's better than you when it comes to medical. That's another big piece. What's better than you? I'm blessed because there's people in our neighborhood who we've met who are way better than me. You know what I mean? In doctors, field medics we have in the neighborhood and stuff like that. So, and you may too. You know, the beauty of a neighborhood is you don't know what kind of resources you have till you get to know them. So you want to have at least one sort of line of communication with someone who's better than you, because you will definitely eventually run into something that your book and your first aid and stuff is probably too much for you to handle.
Okay, so probably the most exciting part of this 6-stage process is the evacuation, right? So in what scenario would we have to evacuate?
We see evacuation, or we see failed evacuation even here all the time. You know, the West Coast is burdened by wildfires every year. Every year, people are rushed out of their homes in a matter of minutes because the fires have come up over the hills and are coming down the hills now, and you have to get out of your house, or else either you're prepared for a situation like that or you're not. And if you're not, then everything in your house is gone. You literally get in a position where you can't grab stuff and go. So you can put things in place to really help you out if you think about evacuation.
I think one of the reasons the British were able to have such a all-encompassing empire is because our island is, protected by a moat. No one can get in. No one can get out as well, right?
Right.
But no one can get out. And it's a very, very temperate climate here. We don't get hurricanes, really. We don't get floods, really. Yeah. We don't get earthquakes. We don't get any forest fires or anything like that. It's very temperate. Not much happens here when it comes to the weather, and that's what all we talk about here is the weather and how great it is. And so,
I'll give you an example for you guys.
Yeah,
about evacuation. I live in Richmond, Virginia. We were at the center of sort of the 2020 Black Lives Matter riot situation because we had a strip called Monument Avenue. Well, we still have a strip called Monument Avenue that was filled with monuments of Confederate leaders because the Confederacy was Richmond. Richmond, Virginia is the capital of the Confederacy during the Civil War, right? The White House, the Southern Confederate White House is in Richmond, Virginia. So that was a big part of the history here. And somehow George Floyd being murdered turned into, we have to rip all the statues of the Confederate leaders down, right? And there were riots here a lot. They were across the river. They were pretty far from me, but they were here a lot. And I found myself in sort of an intelligence gathering mode certain nights of the week, trying to map the riots based off of the communications that I could get from the fire department. The fire department would tell you where they're staging trucks for potential fires. You could go on social media and rioters are pretty dumb and they'll film the whole thing so you can really get an idea of sort of where they're at. Had they reached a certain point on this side of the river, then we were prepared to evacuate, right? And when I say evacuate, I don't mean bug out, run away, never come back. I'm talking about leave the home and go away to a local hotel for the night, several nights until the police get things under control. That's civil unrest. Civil unrest is coming everywhere.
I think that's the biggest thing we do have to prepare for. I think that's it.
You definitely do. Because you guys don't even have woods to run to. You know what I mean? No. So you definitely want to have an escape route, sort of evacuation plan. The key to a good evacuation plan is identifying right off the bat, sort of, when do we leave? Because it gets real gray because there's a lot to lose, right? So it's like they're getting the problem's getting close. How close does it have to get before we leave? If you leave it up to chance, then you might make a bad choice.
So what's the decision-making tree in relation to knowing when to go? Right? How long do you hold your ground, and when do you make the decision to bail? What are the factors involved in coming to that decision?
So let's stay with civil unrest since that's easiest.
Yeah.
For you and relatable. You want to think about roads. You want to think about proximity. So it's going to be all personal because of where you live and what you have to prepare for. But you've got to look at a map and say, what's the last road that this thing can move to before I want to get in the car and have to be on adjacent roads getting away from it, right? Because there comes a point where if they cross a certain road, you might have to drive through them to get out or to get away. And so you want to plan for when, proximity reaches a certain point. They get close enough, it's time to go.
Yeah, because I feel as if there's a big scandal brewing in the United Kingdom at the moment. We're getting like boatloads of illegal immigrants coming in every single day. Every single day they're coming in, right? And
we know
the Coast Guard are bringing them in, right? And
we know how you feel. Trust me.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of ambivalent about it. I'm not angry. It's just I'm being objective about the situation rather than being emotional. Yeah. They're now starting to put them in hotels. All our hotels are now being taken over by the government, and I'm housing all of these men at military age, fighting men, no women, no children, all being put up in hotels around us. So if in a shit hits the fan scenario, yeah, those guys, they don't have anything to lose other than they want to survive at all costs. And you can blame them for wanting to do that, right? But so there is these elements that are starting to appear and develop in our society here. And I like to think about worst case scenario so that anything less than that I can handle. If the shit does really hit the fan and we lose the water, we lose the food, yeah, we lose the power, then it's every man for himself, largely.
Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully, though, it's some men, right? It's not just every man for himself, because you've met men and you've already talked about this with. You know, that's the goal. The goal is not to be every man for himself. I have just me.
No, because you can't do it on your own.
You know, that's the neighborhood conversation that's vital that people have now. And it's so good to have now. I had it in 2015, or that's when we started it. People were like, I had to beat around the bush. You know, the beautiful thing about where everyone's at right now is you don't have to be around the bush. Yeah, you can say 2020, riots of 2020, election chaos of 2020, you know, all that. And now this situation, it's so you got a lot of ground to stand on when you start talking to people, you know.
100%. Because I always thought, like, you know, if you need a compound, you need like a group of men who are prepared to stand and defend the turf or evacuate. And the thing is, in the UK, there's not many places we can evacuate to. it's a tiny island, and unless you can sail or you have a boat, and I've already played that scenario out in my head as well. I used to be a filmmaker, right? Years and years and years ago, and I wrote a movie script. It was one movie script I wrote, and it was a post-apocalypse in the UK, right? About what had happened if the shit hit the fan, you know. And there's a guy with a father with his two sons, and when I was trying to figure it out, I thought, well, the only thing we can do here is escape the island, and the only way you can get off the island in that situation would be by boat.
You guys got to have people. It's a must. You got to plan. You know, if I were in a situation like that, I would be in maps a lot. I would be in maps, and I've done this here. I'd be in maps. I'd be looking at roads and crossroads and highways and routes and what are we going to block off? How are we going to block it off when the time comes? Who's going to man those positions when those roads are blocked off? How are we going to communicate back to home base or with one another? You know, because that's your best bet. You're going to have to coordinate off areas that are secured to make sure that it's not just a free-for-all, people come in wherever they want to come in. Sat down and looked at a map, you'd see strategic places where if we stop this road, or if we at least man this road, we can control some of the chaos. You know, we can prevent a truckload of guys driving to the front yard.
The town where I live, right, is a little bit north of Liverpool, and it's on a coast. There's only 3 roads, one in from the south, one in from the north, and one in from the east. That's it. There's only 3 ways in for the whole town. So you got there your defensive points. I can't believe I'm chatting to you about the defense of Southport. But the thing is like, you know, it's a man should prepare for the worst, right? The worst may never ever happen, and hopefully it won't. But I think it's good practice to think in those terms. No, even though the conversation sounds crazy a little bit, that you're thinking that the end of the world's going to come, we're going to lose our water, our power, our food, you know, all that stuff, right? Which has never happened in my lifetime, has never happened in my father's lifetime, although they experienced the Second World War, which was pretty hard, you know. So
that's the end of the world as you know it, for sure.
That's 100%. Yeah. So they had rations, they had a lack of water, lack of power, all those things, and we're getting rained down with bombs.
You know, you got to remember that also we've only had the running water and and the big fat stuffed supermarkets for a short period of time, there's not a lot of history to compare it to. So in other
Mm.
words, if something like that happened in the 1700s in the US, there wasn't supermarkets to disturb, there wasn't water lines to disturb. We were a different kind of people. So the type of people we are today, we can't just snap from Twitter and TikTok into, well, I guess we're hunting for our food for the rest of our time, and we're raising chickens and animals, because the raising of the animals, that's the fun part. When you have
Mm.
to cut the head off or slit the jugular vein of the chicken and then rip all the feathers off and cut the anus out and pull the guts out and turn it into an actual piece of meat, people aren't equipped for that, man. They'll need
Me,
therapy.
especially me. I was already going, oh no, man, I can't do that to the chicken. I can't do that to the chicken.
You.
But when you're hungry
That's
enough, right, all of those natural instincts, they just come flooding back. Otherwise you die. It's either survive or die, isn't it? It's adapt or die. And until, I'm in those desperate situations, I'll probably hold back from cutting the chicken's anus out just for now,
Well, I'll tell you what you guys will probably have to deal with first before anything is I'd have a lot of accelerant on hand, because there's going to be a lot of suicide and a lot of death and a lot of bodies that are going to need disposed of, I'm sure, especially since you're so tight-knit. In a worst-case scenario situation, I can't imagine the amount of suicide that would happen in the States if things got that bad. I mean, it would be epic proportion suicide, because there's just going to be so many people that don't want anything to do with that version of life. I mean, there's people so many people kill themselves here now. It's unreal. And life is beautiful. It's never been more convenient. It's never been more easy to make money. It's never been more comfortable. So if people wake up in mass and realize there's no more water, there's no more food, there's people out there murdering whoever they want, taking whatever they want, and raping whoever they want, there's going to be a lot of people who just decide, I'm just offing myself. There's no point in being involved in this. So I imagine that'll be another big problem people would have to deal with, is the bodies, something to concern yourself with. Pyres. Is that what it is, right? Funeral pyres.
Funeral pyres, yeah. Like the old days.
People are going to check out for sure. They're not going to go through it. Just for the reasons you just said.
I guess you don't get invited to a lot of parties.
No, I could have a great conversation. It depends on how real people want to get, No,
I'm joking. So what's the future hold for you at the moment and the Prepper Broadcasting Network? Tell us a little bit about that, how it works.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy, because we've gone from a talk about doom and gloom to the hope of the free world lately. Our listeners now and the people who are members at the Prepper Broadcasting Network, when they communicate with us, I feel like we can do this now. I feel like there's hope. I feel better about the world now because I'm doing X, Y, and Z. So it's been a real switcheroo. You know what I mean? We were in a situation before 2020 where it was like, bad things can happen. You better prepare for them. And we had our group of listeners that were like, yeah, we know, we're doing it. And then after that, it became sort of, please tell us how to maximize our quality of life in this world that is just totally out of control, changing so much. Who can keep up with it? Our listeners want that stable ground in this sort of unstable world. They want to build that stable ground themselves, and they want to know that they built it and that it's going to be there no matter what happens. So we do that through so many varieties of shows. We have homestead-driven shows. We have firearms and tactics-driven shows. We have urban survival shows, bushcrafting shows. Just the whole gamut of survival. And I like being able to just throw that at the public right now as the Prepper Broadcasting Network, and having them sort of grab and hold on to what it is that they think's important in the moment. We have, like I said, 19 different hosts that go on air every week. There's a show. There's almost 2 shows on every single day at Prepper Broadcasting. Yeah, the overwhelming feeling right now is that of hope. It's really a weird place to be. I've never felt that way about what we do, because usually we're the people that the media calls when North Korea is going to shoot a nuclear weapon off, or there's a pandemic. We did a lot of media through that period of time. I don't do media anymore now. The mainstream stuff, they call me, New York Times and stuff. I don't waste my time with them because they don't they don't care about the message. You know, they don't want people to get better.
But it's like a lot of people, again, COVID was such an apocalypse, right? In the sense that it was a revealing of people, of the culture, of society, and a lot of people who had been condemned and ridiculed as being nutcases and conspiracy theorists for 20, 30 years previous, all of a sudden these things came to pass and they were proven correct. It was a vindication of years and years and years of raising the alarm and warning people about what's coming and being condemned and ridiculed for it. All of a sudden, you know, you were right and you stood your ground and you were right. So especially with the prepper community, because the prepper community, we're ridiculed for this like doom and gloom scenario. It'll never happen. We're civilized. This is, you know, this is great, this world we live in. Then actually, you know, we told you so. And that wasn't just the only time as well. Be prepared for the next one that's coming down the pipe.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
you know, is what we're talking about now. So I think maybe it might, you know, you're talking about hope. That might be something to do with the fact that all of a sudden is that your ideas have been validated, you know, and the work and the effort you put in.
Well, it's the last. I also think it's one of the last games in town too. You know what I mean? We're getting to that point where like, what do I do? You know, and we're over here doing the things that people have always done, and having such a large base of hosts also allows people to, you know, if you see one guy and he says he's a prepper and he's making a video or a podcast in his bunker and telling you the way that he does things, it's easy to discredit that. But it's hard to listen to 19 different people in a week tell you all the stuff we're talking about is happening. Here's the article that I picked to read you about. Here's what I'm doing to prevent it. And you're in this world where like, here's another one. Here's a man. Here's a woman. Here's a white guy. Here's a black guy. You know what I mean? And all these people are hitting you in a week's time and you're going, how could it be fake? Like, how could it not work? All these people are espousing it. They feel so, because everybody that hosts at PBN is volunteer. I mean, they have their own money making, you know, ventures, books. Almost everybody's an author, but I don't have enough money. We don't make enough money that I could pay salaries to 19 different people. People largely do this out of a desire to tell people, hey, things are bad, but this is how you can make it better. And they also have, you know, they have sort of an entertainment level of them that they can't quiet down either, which I am blessed to have found people like that. But yeah, it's just an incredible environment, man, where, like you said, that vindication exists, and it exists based off of it's proven by the amount of people that show up there and do their thing week after week.
Well, it's great. Coming to the end of the podcast now. I'm running out of time. Been fantastic talking to you. I'm really happy that I've now got an expert on speed dial for when I need to know what happens when the shit hits the fan. James, I've got a few unsavory characters outside my compound. What do you think the best advice to deal with these people?
No doubt about it.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you again. No, so maybe put some prepping measures in place, and we'll take it from there. So, where can people find you, James? What's the links that you've got? Where are you online?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Prepperbroadcasting.com is our website. We've got a lot of juicy stuff over there if you want to get deeper into prepping. But if you're a podcast listener, we're everywhere. So you got Stitcher, you got Spotify, you got Google Podcasts, whatever you do, just type in the Prepper Broadcasting Network or Prepper Broadcasting Network. We'll show up. You'll know it's us because the amount of content that we put out is ungodly. I mean, we have 20 hosts, 19 hosts, but we put out more than 20 pieces of content a week because we can't shut up about it right now. It's our time. It's our time, and we fundamentally believe that this is the answer to the time. There may be other things that you can attach to it as the answer, but we fundamentally believe that the life of self-reliance and independence is the way out of whatever the hell they're planning right now. You know what I mean? And whatever else is happening to the planet at large. Like every host there fundamentally believes that.
I think we can be 100% sure they are planning something, and it's not nice. It's not going to be good for us. and we need to have some kind of counter plan and counteraction, because when it comes, it'll come hard and it'll come fast, and it'll overwhelm us if we're not at some level of preparedness. But it's been great chatting to you. It really has. Really great ideas. I
Yeah,
love
definitely.
it. Any last words that you want to say to our audience before we shut down?
Yeah, sure. I tell this to the new listeners and the listening audience at Prepper Broadcasting all the time. If you've run into me, into James Walton, and you've heard about the Prepper Broadcasting Network, there's a reason for it. You're in the right place. You've happened upon this situation for a reason. Check out Prepper Broadcasting, and that point will start to really ratchet up in your mind. You found this network for a reason. I can promise you that.
Brilliant. James Walton, thanks so much for coming on Eyes Wide Open. Until next time, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, sir.